Okay, so I just read this book, The Elements of Spellcrafting by Jason Miller, and I thought I'd talk about it. First of all, let me again mention that I'm using a front-facing camera, so everything's backwards, which is why this book is backwards, and also why those occult symbols behind me are backwards. A lot of people like to comment that the occult symbols are backwards, and I know, it's because of the camera. So anyway, I just read this book. It's actually a really fun book, a really interesting book, and a book that I recommend. But before I get into talking about it anymore, I want to talk a little bit about Jason Miller and why I felt like I had to read this book when I saw it came out. Okay, so Jason Miller is a guy named Jason who's got some kids, and he's in his 40s. He's from the Northeast, all of which are descriptions of me. His name's also English, so is mine. So we're like really similar in a lot of ways, and our careers have not really gone the same way per se, but they seem to really kind of it's weird. In 2007, I wrote a book called The Book of Magic Power, and if you look at it, you can see you can't see it all that well in this light, but it's got sort of like it looks like an old book, and it's got 3 keys. There are 3 keyholes because I discuss 3 keys of magic in the book. 2 years later, Jason comes out with a book called The Sorcerer's Secrets. It's got a key, key right there on the front, and it too is brown and has sort of like this cover. And they're very different books. Don't get me wrong. In many ways, my book is almost a little too ambitious. I talk about a huge variety of subjects, whereas he kind of stays, more in like a practical area of things that are, that he suggests that you should probably do to achieve relatively realistic and simple goals. It's a good book too. In 2007, I released a book called Sexual Sorcery. One of the worst covers of a book ever in the history of books, I just want to say. But it's a great book. Like about 10 years later, I don't have a copy of this book, but 10 years later, Jason Miller released a book called Sex, Sorcery, and Spirit. So I wrote a book called Sexual Sorcery, and then Jason Miller, whose career already resembles mine, we have all these things in common, writes a book called Sex, Sorcery, and Spirit. And I can't even be angry with him in the slightest for making such a similar title, because the 2 books are published by the same publisher, Wiser Books. So, I mean, thanks, Wiser, for a real kick in the nuts. You gave me the worst cover ever, and then published a book with almost exactly the same title by another guy named Jason. But, we're enlightened beings here, so we don't need to become upset about these sorts of things. But, so Jason then comes out with this book recently called The Elements of Spellcrafting. Well, I'm not going to tell you the title of a book that I've been working on for quite some time, but it seemed sort of spookily close to, it might be a similar book to what he'd written, and I was like, oh man, now he's beating me to writing these books. Thankfully, in reading this, his book has pretty much absolutely nothing to do with the subject matter of my book, and my book has a different enough title that you probably won't even realize, if it ever comes out, what I was talking about. But at any rate, what this book actually is it's a series of 21 keys to successful sorcery, basically it's 21 little pieces of advice on how to be a more effective magician, how to work your magic in a more effective way in a number of different ways. Most of them are more about the way that you look at things and the way that you approach things rather than anything specific. There's actually, this book shouldn't be your first book about magic, because there's almost nothing in here that is actually like practical and exactly what step by step what you should do. If you're looking for a step-by-step book, you might want to consider The Book of Magic Power by Jason Augustus Newcomb, not Jason Miller. Don't get confused. I'm sorry. There's a lot of information coming at you at once. But at any rate, this book here, The Elements of Spellcrafting, it has some great advice in it that I really think that pretty much everyone should read. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of the people who should read it most are the very people who are least likely to read it. And those are people who have really strong predefined ideas of what magic is, what magic isn't, what the rules are. Those sort of folks should really check this book out, because I really think it's not mean spirited, it's actually funny and lighthearted throughout, but it picks away at some of the stuff that is starting to kind of solidify in the magical community that is not really all that helpful. It also is a very good reality check throughout about things. Like, one of the things he suggested that I thought was really interesting to me when I read it was, if your magic always works, you're not really doing magic. I'm paraphrasing him, and his point is that if you set the bar so low for your results that every time there's success, that means that you're not really setting your bar at a point where you're achieving anything. You're just, you're saying, I'm going to do a wealth spell. Oh, Jupiter, bring me wealth. And then you go outside and find a quarter on the ground and you're satisfied. That's, probably not in the long term the best approach. Although certainly, if you're just starting, it's a good attitude to generally have a positive attitude towards manifestations. But keeping the bar so low that everything is a success is going to keep you from growing as a magician. So that's one piece of advice, out of which, and I actually think that's only one part of one piece of advice, out of which there are 22. So if you're kind of like an intermediate magic user or even a beginning magic user, you should definitely check it out. If you consider yourself a highly advanced magical user, you really need to check it out. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful and will help Jason sell some copies of his books. I get nothing from it. I would only get something if you were to purchase either of these two books, which are also excellent. Talk to you later.